Many people believe kindness means always staying available for everyone. They believe patience means tolerating any behavior. They believe compassion means allowing others to take from them endlessly. But the Buddha taught something very different. He taught that wisdom is not only about loving others, it is also about understanding the nature of suffering, attachment, and human behavior. Some people enter your life not because they value you, but because they value what you provide. Your time, your attention, your energy, your support. And the moment those things are no longer available, their presence disappears like mist in the morning sun. If you are not careful, you will spend years feeding relationships that slowly drain your peace. And the painful truth is this: not everyone who comes to you deserves a permanent seat in your life. Some people come only to take. And sometimes the most spiritual thing you can do is quietly step away. Not with anger, not with hatred, but with deep understanding. Because detachment is not cruelty. Detachment is clarity. Today, I want to share 7 lessons from Buddhist wisdom that will help you understand why walking away from selfish people is not weakness. It is spiritual strength. The Buddha taught that craving is one of the deepest roots of human suffering. In the teachings, craving is described as a restless hunger of the mind. It is the constant desire to acquire, to hold on to gain something that we believe will satisfy us. But the problem with craving is that it never truly ends. When one desire is fulfilled, another immediately takes its place. This is why the Buddha explained that craving does not bring lasting happiness. Instead, it keeps the mind trapped in a cycle of wanting, taking, and chasing more. Now, when this craving enters relationships, something very subtle begins to happen. The relationship stops being about connection. It becomes about benefit. A person whose mind is dominated by craving begins to look at people the same way they look at opportunities. Instead of asking, "How can I understand this person?" or "How can I support them?" their mind quietly asks a different question. "What can I gain from this person?" Sometimes this question is not even conscious. Many selfish people do not wake up in the morning planning to use others, but craving quietly shapes their behavior without them realizing it. They are drawn to people who provide something useful. They maintain relationships that give them advantage, and they slowly lose interest in connections that do not serve their desires. At first, this can be difficult to notice, because selfish people often appear warm and friendly in the beginning. They show enthusiasm. They give compliments. They appear supportive. But if you watch carefully, you will notice a pattern. Their attention is strongest when they need something. If you have knowledge, they suddenly become very interested in your advice. If you have resources, they remember you when they face financial problems. If you have influence or connections, they stay close because you open doors for them. If you are emotionally strong, they come to you whenever their life becomes difficult. But here is the important question that reveals everything. What happens when you are the one who needs support? What happens when you are tired? What happens when you cannot help them anymore? Very often the behavior begins to change. The enthusiasm fades. The attention becomes weaker. Messages become slower. Excuses become more common. And sometimes the person disappears completely. This is one of the clearest signs that the relationship was never built on genuine connection. It was built on usefulness. The Buddha encouraged his followers to observe human behavior carefully. He taught that wisdom begins when we stop looking at people through the lens of hope and start looking through the lens of awareness. When you watch people calmly, without emotional attachment clouding your judgment, patterns become visible. You begin to notice who appears only when they benefit. You begin to notice who disappears when they cannot gain anything. And you begin to notice who remains present even when there is nothing to gain. This awareness is extremely important because many compassionate people fall into a painful trap. They assume everyone values relationships the same way they do. They assume that kindness will naturally be returned with kindness. They assume that loyalty will naturally create loyalty. But human beings are not always guided by wisdom. Many people are guided by craving. And craving does not understand loyalty. Craving only understands gain. This is why selfish individuals often move from one person to another, depending on who is most useful at the moment. When someone else offers greater benefit, their attention shifts. When a situation stops serving their desires, they lose interest. And if you are not aware of this pattern, you may spend years feeling confused. You may ask yourself painful questions. Did I do something wrong? Why did they change? Why do they only appear when they need something? But once you understand the nature of craving, the confusion begins to disappear. You realize their behavior is not about you. It is about the way their mind operates. A mind controlled by craving does not build deep connections. It builds temporary alliances. And temporary alliances last only as long as the benefit remains. This understanding does something very powerful inside you. It removes unnecessary emotional weight. You stop blaming yourself. You stop trying endlessly to prove your worth. You stop exhausting yourself trying to maintain relationships that were never balanced in the first place. Instead, you begin to see clearly. You recognize that some people are in your life not because they value you, but because they value what they receive from you. And this realization is not meant to make you bitter. It is meant to make you wise. Because once you see clearly, you can begin protecting your energy. You become more mindful about who you invest your time in. You become more aware of who truly cares about your well-being. And you become less attached to people who appear only when it benefits them. The Buddha never encouraged people to hate or condemn others for their weaknesses. Instead, he encouraged understanding. When you recognize that someone is acting from craving, you simply acknowledge it. You understand that their mind is still trapped in desire and self-interest. And with that understanding, you stop expecting from them what they are not capable of giving. This is the beginning of true detachment. Not coldness, not anger, but clarity. When clarity appears, you stop trying to turn selfish people into loyal companions. You stop trying to force deep connection with those who only seek advantage. And instead, you quietly adjust your presence. You give your time to those who respect it. You give your energy to those who reciprocate it. You give your trust to those who protect it. Because spiritual wisdom is not only about loving everyone equally, it is also about recognizing who truly deserves a place in your life. And that recognition begins the moment you understand one simple truth. Some people are guided by connection, but others are guided by craving. And once you see the difference clearly, your path becomes much more peaceful. Many compassionate people fall into a quiet trap without realizing it. They believe that being a good person means always being available, always helping, always supporting others, no matter the situation. They feel that saying no is selfish. They feel that setting limits is unkind. They feel that refusing someone's request somehow makes them a bad person. So they continue giving. They give their time. They give their energy. They give their attention. They give their emotional strength. And in the beginning, this may even feel rewarding. Helping others can create a sense of purpose. It can make you feel useful and appreciated. When someone thanks you or relies on you, it can give you the feeling that you matter in their life. But the Buddha taught that generosity must always be guided by wisdom. Without awareness, generosity can slowly turn into self-neglect. Because when a person keeps giving without observing what is happening around them, something dangerous begins to develop. They start attracting people who only know how to take. Selfish individuals naturally gravitate toward people who rarely set boundaries. They recognize those who are always willing to sacrifice their own comfort for others. And once they find such a person, they return again and again. Not because they deeply value the relationship, but because the source of benefit is reliable. Over time, the compassionate person becomes the one everyone runs to when they have problems. Someone needs advice, they call you. Someone has emotional struggles, they come to you. Someone needs help solving a difficult situation, they expect you to listen. And little by little, your role in these relationships becomes clear. You are not the friend. You are the support system. You are the solution provider. You are the person who absorbs everyone else's stress. At first, you may not notice how heavy this becomes, but slowly, something inside you begins to change. Your mind becomes tired. Your patience becomes thinner. Your peace becomes fragile. You begin feeling emotionally drained even when nothing dramatic is happening in your life. This exhaustion is not random. It is the natural result of imbalance. The Buddha often emphasized the importance of the middle path. The middle path is the practice of balance in all aspects of life. It avoids the extremes of selfishness on one side and self-destruction on the other. If a person only thinks about themselves, they create suffering for others. But if a person constantly sacrifices themselves without awareness, they eventually create suffering within themselves. Both extremes lead to instability. True wisdom lies in balance. Giving is beautiful when it comes from a calm and mindful heart. But giving becomes dangerous when it is driven by guilt, pressure, or fear of disappointing others. Many people continue helping simply because they feel obligated. They worry that if they stop, people will think badly of them. They fear that saying no will damage the relationship. They feel responsible for solving problems that do not actually belong to them. And slowly their life becomes filled with responsibilities that were never meant to be theirs. The Buddha encouraged people to observe their own state of mind carefully. If helping someone brings peace, clarity, and genuine compassion, it is a healthy action. But if helping someone constantly leaves you feeling drained, resentful, or overwhelmed, then awareness must enter the situation. Because compassion does not require destroying yourself. In fact, a person who constantly exhausts their own energy eventually loses the ability to help anyone effectively. Imagine a lamp that provides light for others. If the oil inside the lamp is never replenished, eventually the flame fades. No matter how much the lamp wants to shine, it cannot continue without fuel. Human energy works the same way. If you are constantly giving emotional support, time, and effort without ever protecting your own well-being, eventually your mind becomes depleted. When this happens, even small problems start feeling overwhelming. You lose your sense of calm. Your patience disappears more quickly. And sometimes you even begin feeling resentment toward the very people you tried to help. This is why detachment becomes necessary. Detachment is not the rejection of compassion. It is the protection of your inner stability. When you detach from selfish individuals who only take from you, you are not becoming cruel. You are restoring balance. You are recognizing that your energy is limited and valuable. You are understanding that not every request deserves your time. And most importantly, you are learning that your peace of mind is not something you should constantly sacrifice. When awareness enters your relationships, your behavior begins to change naturally. You stop responding immediately to every problem others bring to you. You stop feeling responsible for fixing every situation. You begin observing whether the relationship contains mutual care or only one-sided dependence. And when you notice that someone only appears when they need help, you quietly adjust your availability. Not with anger, not with confrontation, simply with awareness. You become less available to those who drain you, and more present for those who genuinely value you. This shift may feel uncomfortable at first, because many people are used to your constant giving. When you begin protecting your energy, some individuals may react with confusion or disappointment. But this reaction often reveals an important truth. If someone becomes upset the moment you stop sacrificing yourself for them, it means they were benefiting from the imbalance. Healthy relationships do not collapse when boundaries appear. Healthy relationships respect them. And once you learn this lesson, your life becomes lighter. Your mind becomes calmer. Your compassion becomes wiser. Because you are no longer giving blindly. You are giving consciously. You are choosing when to offer support and when to step back. And that balance is exactly what the Buddha described as the path of wisdom. One of the most painful realizations people have in relationships is the moment they suddenly feel used. They look back at the months or years they spent helping someone, supporting them, trusting them, and they begin to wonder how the relationship became so one-sided. They feel confused. They feel disappointed. Sometimes they even feel betrayed. But when the situation is examined carefully, something important becomes clear. Most exploitative relationships do not begin with obvious selfishness. They begin with small signs that are easy to ignore. The Buddha often spoke about the importance of awareness. He encouraged his followers to observe life carefully, because suffering often continues not because the truth is hidden, but because we refuse to see what is already visible. When a relationship begins to form, the early behavior of a person usually reveals a great deal about their mindset. But many people overlook these signals. At the beginning, the selfish person might appear friendly and appreciative. They may speak kindly, show interest in your life, and give the impression that they value the connection. But subtle patterns start appearing very early. For example, they may contact you primarily when they need something. When they face a problem, they suddenly remember you. When they need advice, they call. When they need emotional comfort, they reach out. But when their life is going smoothly, the connection becomes quiet. You may not hear from them for long periods. Another early sign appears in how they respond when you are the one who needs support. When you share your struggles, they may appear distracted. They may quickly change the subject. They may offer only brief responses before returning to their own concerns. Sometimes they even disappear entirely when the conversation is no longer about their needs. At first, these small moments may seem harmless. You may think they are busy. You may assume they are simply going through a difficult period. You may tell yourself that everyone behaves differently during stressful times. And because you want the relationship to succeed, you give them the benefit of the doubt. But the Buddha warned about something very important. The mind often protects its attachments by creating excuses. When we want a relationship to work, we naturally ignore signs that contradict our hope. We tell ourselves comforting stories to avoid the discomfort of seeing reality clearly. This is how unhealthy patterns slowly become normal. The first time someone forgets to support you, you overlook it. The second time, you excuse it. The third time, you accept it. And after enough repetition, the imbalance becomes part of the relationship itself. At that point, the selfish person begins to assume that your support will always be available. They begin relying on you without feeling the need to reciprocate. They begin expecting your help instead of appreciating it. And before you realize it, you are carrying the weight of a relationship that no longer contains mutual care. The Buddha explained that suffering often grows when awareness is absent. When the mind is not paying attention, harmful patterns quietly strengthen. But when awareness enters the situation, everything becomes clearer. You begin noticing how often the person reaches out only when they need something. You begin noticing how rarely they check on your well-being. You begin noticing that your role in their life revolves mostly around solving problems. This awareness can feel uncomfortable at first, because it challenges the image you had of the relationship. You may realize that the connection was never as balanced as you believed. But this discomfort is actually the beginning of wisdom. The Buddha described wisdom as the ability to see things as they truly are, not as we wish them to be, not as we imagine them to be, but as they actually are. Once you see clearly, you gain the power to change your behavior. You stop ignoring patterns that harm your peace. You stop pretending that imbalance is normal, and you stop investing energy in relationships that repeatedly show the same unhealthy structure. Another important truth the Buddha emphasized is that people reveal their character through consistent behavior. Anyone can appear kind for a short period. Anyone can offer support when it is convenient. But a person's true nature becomes visible through patterns that repeat over time. If someone repeatedly disappears when you need them, that pattern speaks clearly. If someone repeatedly returns only when they need help, that pattern also speaks clearly. And once patterns become obvious, continuing to ignore them only creates deeper frustration. This is why mindful awareness is so powerful. It allows you to observe relationships without emotional blindness. You begin paying attention not only to what people say, but also to what they consistently do. You notice whether appreciation is genuine or temporary. You notice whether support flows in both directions or only one. You notice whether the relationship brings calmness or constant exhaustion. These observations give you the clarity you need to make wise decisions. Because detachment rarely happens suddenly. It usually begins with recognition. Recognition that the relationship is not what you believed it was. Recognition that the imbalance has been present for a long time. Recognition that continuing in the same pattern will only lead to more frustration. And once this recognition appears, you begin adjusting your presence. You may become less available. You may reduce the emotional energy you invest. You may slowly step back from a dynamic that constantly drains you. This is not an act of cruelty. It is an act of awareness. Because the Buddha did not teach people to blindly tolerate suffering. He taught them to understand it. And once suffering is understood, the path toward freedom becomes visible. That freedom often begins with one simple but powerful step. Finally choosing to see the early signs you once ignored. One of the most powerful teachings in Buddhism is the teaching of attachment. The Buddha explained that attachment is one of the main forces that keeps people trapped in cycles of suffering. Attachment makes the mind cling to people, expectations, identities, and situations even when they are clearly causing pain. And this becomes especially visible in relationships. Many people remain in unhealthy relationships not because they are unaware of the problem, but because they are emotionally attached to what they hoped the relationship would be. They remember the early moments. They remember the good conversations. They remember the kindness that appeared at the beginning. And these memories create a strong emotional bond. So when the relationship slowly becomes one-sided, the mind begins resisting the truth. You may start noticing that someone only comes to you when they need something. You may notice that your efforts are rarely returned. You may even feel the exhaustion that comes from constantly supporting someone who never truly supports you. But attachment whispers a powerful message. Maybe things will change. They didn't mean to behave this way. They are just going through a difficult time. You shouldn't give up on them. These thoughts sound compassionate on the surface, but often they are simply the voice of attachment trying to protect the relationship. The Buddha warned that attachment blinds the mind. When we are attached to someone, we often stop seeing them clearly. We see them through the lens of hope instead of reality. We focus on who they were in the beginning instead of who they consistently show themselves to be. And because of this, we tolerate behaviors that slowly damage our peace. This tolerance does not happen all at once. It grows gradually. At first, you overlook a small disappointment. Then you overlook a larger one. Then you begin adjusting your expectations so the behavior hurts less. And before you realize it, you have normalized a relationship that drains you. You may even begin blaming yourself. You may wonder if you are asking for too much. You may question whether you are being too sensitive. But the Buddha encouraged people to examine their suffering carefully. If a relationship repeatedly brings stress, exhaustion, or emotional imbalance, that suffering is trying to tell you something important. It is showing you that something in the situation is not aligned with peace. But attachment makes it difficult to listen to that message, because letting go can feel frightening. You may fear losing the connection. You may fear loneliness. You may fear that stepping away will make you appear cold or uncaring. So, instead of walking away, you remain in the same pattern, hoping that the situation will somehow transform on its own. But the Buddha emphasized that clinging does not create change. Clinging only prolongs suffering. When we cling to relationships that are built on imbalance, we are not practicing compassion. We are practicing fear. Fear of loss. Fear of discomfort. Fear of facing reality. True compassion, according to Buddhist wisdom, includes compassion for yourself. It means recognizing when a situation no longer supports your well-being. It means understanding that protecting your peace is not selfish. It is necessary. Letting go does not mean you stop caring about the person. It simply means you stop clinging to the role you once played in their life. You stop forcing a connection that no longer functions with mutual respect. You stop sacrificing your energy in order to maintain something that has become unhealthy. This is one of the most difficult steps in personal growth, because the mind naturally wants to hold on. The mind wants familiarity. Even if the situation causes discomfort, it can still feel safer than change. But the Buddha repeatedly reminded his followers that freedom requires release. If your hand is tightly holding a burning coal, the only way to stop the pain is to open your hand. Holding tighter will not make the fire disappear. In the same way, holding tightly to unhealthy relationships does not repair them. It only deepens the exhaustion. When you begin releasing attachment, something powerful begins to happen. Your mind becomes lighter. You stop constantly worrying about someone else's behavior. You stop overthinking every conversation. You stop wondering why they do not appreciate you the way you hoped they would. Instead, you accept what is visible. You accept that the relationship has limits. You accept that some people are simply not capable of offering the same depth of care you offer them. And with that acceptance, you begin creating space in your life. Space for relationships that are healthier. Space for friendships that contain mutual respect. Space for people who value your presence instead of only your usefulness. The Buddha did not teach people to isolate themselves from others. He encouraged wise relationships. Relationships that support peace, mindfulness, and growth. But these kinds of relationships can only enter your life when you stop clinging to the ones that constantly drain you. And that process begins with recognizing one simple truth. Sometimes the greatest act of wisdom is not holding on. Sometimes the greatest act of wisdom is learning when to let go. Many people misunderstand what spirituality truly means. They think being spiritual means always being soft, always being accommodating, always sacrificing their own needs for the comfort of others. They believe that if they tolerate everything patiently, they are practicing compassion. But the Buddha never taught people to abandon their dignity. He never taught people to become weak in the face of exploitation. In fact, the teachings constantly emphasize awareness, balance, and self-mastery. And part of that mastery is self-respect. Self-respect is not pride. Self-respect is not arrogance. Self-respect is simply the understanding that your time, your energy, and your presence have value. When a person lacks self-respect, they slowly begin accepting treatment that quietly damages their peace. They tolerate disrespectful behavior. They accept one-sided relationships. They remain available to people who constantly take without giving anything in return. And often they do this because they are afraid of appearing selfish. They worry that protecting themselves will make others judge them. So they continue sacrificing their well-being in order to keep others comfortable. But this pattern slowly erodes the mind, because every time you accept treatment that goes against your inner sense of dignity, something inside you becomes weaker. You begin doubting your own worth. You begin questioning whether your needs matter. You begin believing that your role in life is simply to support others while asking for very little in return. This mindset creates deep exhaustion over time. The Buddha taught that awareness must be applied not only to the external world, but also to the way we treat ourselves. If mindfulness shows us that a situation repeatedly disturbs our peace, wisdom asks us to examine why we continue tolerating it. Self-respect begins with this awareness. It begins with recognizing that you are not obligated to accept every behavior that comes your way. It begins with understanding that compassion must include yourself as well. Many people find this idea difficult because they confuse compassion with endless tolerance. But compassion without boundaries easily turns into self-neglect. Imagine a person who constantly gives their time to those who never appreciate it. Imagine someone who repeatedly solves problems for others who never show gratitude. Imagine someone who is only contacted when they are needed, but rarely remembered otherwise. Over time, that person begins feeling invisible. They begin feeling like a tool instead of a human being, and this feeling slowly destroys inner peace. Self-respect prevents this from happening. When you respect yourself, you naturally become more aware of how others treat you. You begin noticing when your kindness is appreciated, but you also begin noticing when it is taken for granted. You start observing whether the people around you value your presence or simply your usefulness. And once you see these patterns clearly, your behavior begins to change. You stop chasing approval from people who never offer appreciation. You stop trying to prove your value to those who already benefit from your presence. You stop explaining yourself to individuals who only approach you when they need something. Instead, you quietly shift your attention toward people who treat you with genuine respect. This shift does not require confrontation. It does not require anger. Often, it simply requires distance. The Buddha emphasized that wise people learn to associate with those who support their growth and inner stability. He described good companionship as one of the most important influences on the path toward wisdom. But this kind of companionship cannot exist if you constantly surround yourself with people who see you only as a resource. Self-respect acts like a filter. It helps you recognize which relationships deserve your time and which ones do not. It allows you to step away from environments where your kindness is constantly exploited. And it protects your mind from the exhaustion that comes from endless giving without appreciation. Some people may misunderstand this change. When you stop being endlessly available, those who benefited from your sacrifices may feel uncomfortable. They may say, "You have changed." They may say you have become distant. But often what they truly mean is that they no longer have the same access to your time and energy. And that reaction reveals something important. Healthy relationships do not collapse when boundaries appear. Healthy relationships adapt to them. People who genuinely care about you will respect your limits. They will understand that your well-being matters. They will appreciate your presence rather than expect your constant service. Self-respect allows these healthier relationships to grow. Because when you value your own peace, You naturally move toward environments where that peace is protected. The Buddha taught that the mind becomes stable when it is free from unnecessary disturbance. But stability cannot exist when your energy is constantly drained by people who treat you like an option. Self-respect restores that stability. It reminds you that your presence is not something to be given endlessly without awareness. It reminds you that your energy is not an unlimited resource. And most importantly, it reminds you that protecting your peace is not selfish. It is a form of wisdom, a form of discipline, and a necessary step on the path toward a calm and balanced mind. One of the biggest misunderstandings people have about detachment is the belief that leaving a relationship must involve conflict. Many people think that stepping away from someone who repeatedly uses them requires confrontation, arguments, or emotional explosions. They imagine dramatic moments where everything must be said, every mistake must be pointed out, and every injustice must be exposed. But the Buddha showed a very different way. He taught that wisdom does not always speak loudly. Sometimes wisdom simply observes, understands, and quietly steps aside. Walking away from selfish people does not require anger. In fact, anger often keeps you tied to the situation even longer. When anger enters the mind, it keeps replaying the story. You keep thinking about what they did. You keep thinking about what you should have said. You keep imagining conversations that will never happen. And without realizing it, your mind remains attached to the very situation you are trying to leave behind. The Buddha taught that hatred never ends through hatred. It only continues the cycle of suffering. This is why mindful detachment is so powerful. Mindful detachment allows you to see a situation clearly without becoming emotionally trapped in it. Instead of reacting with frustration, you begin observing calmly. You notice how the person behaves. You notice how the relationship affects your peace. You notice the patterns that repeat again and again. And once those patterns become obvious, you begin adjusting your actions. You do not need to argue. You do not need to accuse. You do not need to prove that they were wrong. You simply change your level of involvement. If someone constantly contacts you only when they need help, you stop responding immediately every time. If someone expects your support but never offers support in return, you begin limiting how much energy you invest. If someone repeatedly drains your emotional strength, you reduce the space they occupy in your life. This shift can be quiet and gradual. It does not require announcements. It does not require explanations. It simply reflects awareness. The Buddha encouraged people to develop equanimity, which means maintaining a balanced and steady mind regardless of external situations. Equanimity allows you to respond to life with clarity rather than emotional reactivity. When you detach from selfish people with equanimity, you are not running away from them. You are simply refusing to participate in a pattern that harms your peace. This approach protects your mind in a very powerful way. Because when you walk away with anger, the emotional weight remains inside you. Even after the relationship ends, the resentment continues. But when you walk away with understanding, your mind remains calm. You recognize that the other person is acting according to their own level of awareness. Perhaps they are driven by craving. Perhaps they are guided by selfish habits they have never examined. Perhaps they are simply not capable of offering the kind of relationship you hoped for. Instead of fighting that reality, you accept it. Acceptance does not mean approval. It simply means recognizing the truth of the situation. And once the truth is clear, continuing to argue becomes unnecessary. You step back because you understand the nature of the relationship. You reduce your involvement because you recognize its limits. You move forward because you value your peace. This type of detachment is one of the most powerful forms of inner strength. because it shows that your actions are no longer controlled by emotion, they are guided by awareness. Many people expect closure through confrontation. They feel that they must explain everything before walking away. But the Buddha often reminded his followers that understanding does not always need to be spoken. Sometimes clarity within your own mind is enough. You understand the pattern. You understand the imbalance. You understand that continuing the same dynamic will only create more exhaustion. And with that understanding, you quietly shift your path. Some people may notice this change. They may wonder why you are no longer as available as before. They may question why you respond less often or seem more distant. But you do not need to justify your growth, because protecting your inner stability is not something that requires permission. The Buddha described inner peace as one of the highest treasures a person can cultivate. But peace cannot survive in environments where your energy is constantly being drained. Peace requires awareness. Peace requires boundaries. And peace sometimes requires distance. Walking away with anger keeps you chained to the past. Walking away with understanding sets you free. And once you learn this lesson, detachment becomes much easier. Because you no longer see it as rejection. You see it as wisdom in action. A calm decision to step away from what disturbs the mind and move closer to what nourishes it. One of the most surprising realizations people experience after stepping away from selfish individuals is how much quieter their life becomes. For a long time, they may not even realize how much mental noise certain relationships were creating. The constant messages asking for help. The repeated problems that always seem to land on their shoulders. The emotional pressure to fix situations that were never truly their responsibility. The silent expectation that they should always be available. When you are inside these kinds of relationships, the pressure becomes normal. You get used to the interruptions. You get used to the emotional demands. You get used to feeling responsible for other people's problems. And because the pattern has been there for so long, you rarely stop to ask an important question. What would my life feel like without this constant weight? The Buddha often taught that suffering continues when people fail to recognize the causes that produce it. Sometimes the source of your mental exhaustion is not your work. It is not your daily responsibilities. It is the invisible burden of relationships that constantly drain your energy. Exploitative relationships function like a quiet leak in your life. Every conversation takes a little more of your attention. Every request consumes a little more of your emotional strength. Every crisis pulls you into situations that have nothing to do with your own growth or peace. At first, the loss feels small, but over time, that constant drain becomes significant. Your mind becomes more restless. Your patience becomes shorter. Your ability to focus on your own life becomes weaker. And without realizing it, a large portion of your energy is being directed toward people who rarely contribute anything positive in return. This is why detachment can feel so powerful. When you stop entertaining relationships that revolve around exploitation, something remarkable happens. The noise disappears. The constant requests fade. The emotional pressure lifts. And suddenly your mind has space again. Space to breathe. Space to reflect. Space to focus on your own path. Many people discover that the moment they step away from draining relationships, their inner calm begins returning almost immediately. They feel lighter. They feel clearer. They feel more in control of their own time and energy. This is not a coincidence. It is the natural result of removing a source of disturbance from your life. The Buddha explained that peace does not come from controlling the entire world around you. Peace comes from understanding what influences your mind and choosing wisely what you allow into your life. If you constantly allow people who take advantage of your kindness to occupy your time, your mind will remain agitated. But when you begin limiting those influences, the mind gradually becomes calmer. This new space also allows you to reevaluate the kinds of relationships you want to cultivate. Because not all relationships are draining. Some relationships bring encouragement. Some bring balance. Some bring wisdom and genuine care. But these healthier connections often struggle to grow when your life is already filled with people who constantly demand your attention. When exploitative individuals dominate your time, there is very little room left for meaningful companionship. Detachment clears that space. It allows you to invest your time in people who respect your presence, people who value conversation instead of constant requests, people who appreciate your support but do not depend on it endlessly. The Buddha emphasized the importance of wise association. He taught that the people you surround yourself with shape the quality of your mind. If you spend your life around individuals driven by craving, selfishness, and constant need, your mind will remain disturbed. But when you associate with people who respect balance, kindness, and mindfulness, your life becomes more stable. Choosing your relationships wisely is therefore not a selfish act. It is a form of spiritual discipline. It is the recognition that your mind deserves an environment where peace can grow. This does not mean you must hate those who once drained your energy. Hatred would only create another form of suffering inside you. Instead, you simply acknowledge the reality of the relationship. You understand that some people were never meant to stay in your life permanently. They were temporary experiences, lessons that helped you understand your own boundaries, teachers that revealed the importance of protecting your energy. Once that lesson is understood, there is no reason to hold resentment. You simply continue forward with greater awareness. And as your life becomes quieter and more balanced, something important becomes clear. You never actually lost anything valuable by letting exploitative relationships go. What you lost was constant pressure. What you lost was emotional exhaustion. What you lost was the illusion that you were responsible for everyone else's happiness. In exchange, you gained something far more important. You gained peace. You gained clarity. You gained the freedom to invest your time and energy in relationships that are built on mutual respect instead of constant extraction. And this is exactly what the Buddha meant when he taught that wisdom leads to liberation. Liberation from confusion, liberation from unnecessary suffering, and liberation from relationships that quietly steal the calmness of the mind. One of the hardest truths for people to accept is that not every relationship is meant to last. Many people grow up believing that if a connection begins, it should continue forever. They believe that loyalty means holding on no matter how the relationship evolves. They believe that walking away means failure. But the Buddha taught something very different about the nature of life. He taught that everything in existence follows the law of impermanence. Nothing remains exactly the same forever. Seasons change. Circumstances change. People change. And relationships change as well. Some people enter your life during a specific period when your paths cross naturally. Maybe you met during a time when you needed support. Maybe they appeared when you were going through a difficult phase. Maybe the connection formed because your lives were temporarily aligned. But temporary alignment does not always mean permanent connection. As time passes, people's priorities shift. Their values change. Their awareness grows in different directions. And sometimes the relationship that once felt meaningful slowly loses its balance. This is where many people struggle. Instead of recognizing that the relationship has completed its natural cycle, they begin forcing it to continue. They try harder. They invest more effort. They ignore the signs that the connection no longer functions the way it once did. But the Buddha repeatedly emphasized that suffering often comes from clinging to what is meant to pass. When we cling tightly to something that is naturally changing, we create tension inside our own minds. You may find yourself constantly trying to revive the connection. You may try to remind the other person of how things used to be. You may hope that if you remain patient long enough, the relationship will somehow return to its earlier form. But sometimes the truth is simpler. The connection has already changed, and continuing to hold on to it only creates frustration. Selfish individuals often appear during these transitional moments. They recognize that you are someone who gives generously, someone who supports others, someone who is willing to invest deeply in relationships. So they take advantage of that willingness. They accept your help. They accept your time. They accept your emotional support. But they never truly invest themselves in the same way. Their presence remains conditional. They appear when there is benefit. They fade when the benefit disappears. If you are attached to the idea that every relationship must last, you may keep trying to maintain this connection far longer than necessary. You may keep giving your energy to someone who has already stopped valuing the relationship in the same way. And this is where suffering quietly grows. The Buddha encouraged people to look at life through the lens of impermanence. When you understand that change is a natural part of existence, you stop forcing things to remain the same. You begin accepting when certain connections have reached their natural limit. This acceptance is not cold or heartless. It is simply realistic. Not every person who enters your life is meant to walk beside you forever. Some arrive to teach you something. Some arrive to challenge your patience. Some arrive to show you the importance of boundaries. And once the lesson is learned, the relationship naturally fades. This does not mean the experience was meaningless. In fact, even difficult relationships can be valuable teachers. A selfish person may unknowingly help you understand the importance of protecting your energy. Someone who repeatedly takes from you may reveal how important balance is in relationships. Someone who treats you like an option may teach you the importance of self-respect. Every experience contains a lesson if you are willing to observe it. But the lesson is lost if you remain trapped in attachment. If you keep clinging to someone who has already shown you their true priorities, the cycle continues. You keep giving, they keep taking, and the imbalance remains unchanged. Wisdom appears when you finally recognize that not every relationship deserves unlimited space in your life. Some people are meant to stay, others are meant to pass through. The Buddha often compared life to a flowing river. The water that passes your feet in one moment is not the same water that passes in the next. Everything is moving, everything is changing. Trying to freeze the river in place only leads to frustration. But when you understand its nature, you allow it to flow without resistance. Relationships work in the same way. Some people will continue walking beside you because the connection is genuine and balanced. Others will slowly drift away because their role in your life was temporary. Accepting this truth allows your heart to become lighter. You stop forcing relationships that no longer belong in your life. You stop chasing people who only return when they need something. You stop trying to revive connections that have already shown their limits. Instead, you appreciate what each experience taught you. You take the wisdom forward, and you allow the relationship to fade naturally. This is not rejection. This is acceptance. And acceptance is one of the deepest forms of freedom the Buddha spoke about. Because the moment you stop forcing what is meant to pass, your mind becomes peaceful again. One of the most powerful skills a person can develop on the path of wisdom is the ability to observe human behavior without illusions. The Buddha constantly encouraged people to look carefully at the nature of the mind, not only their own mind, but also the behavior of others. Because behavior is often the clearest window into the inner world of a person. Many people make a common mistake in relationships. They listen more to what people say than to what people consistently do. Someone may speak kindly, They may promise loyalty. They may say they care deeply about you. But the Buddha reminded his followers that words are easy. Words require very little effort. Almost anyone can speak in a way that sounds caring, supportive, or sincere. But actions reveal the true condition of the mind. If someone repeatedly appears only when they need something, that pattern reveals something important. If someone constantly expects your support but disappears when you need help, that behavior also reveals something important. If someone remembers you only when they face problems but forgets you when life becomes comfortable again, that pattern is speaking very clearly. It is showing you the priorities of that person's mind. A mind guided by selfishness will naturally organize relationships around benefit. The connection will exist as long as it serves their needs. But when the advantage disappears, the attention fades. This does not necessarily mean the person is intentionally cruel. Sometimes people behave this way simply because they have never examined their own habits. They move through life following desire and convenience without reflecting on how their behavior affects others. But whether the behavior is intentional or unconscious, the result is the same. The relationship becomes unbalanced. Many compassionate people struggle to accept this reality because they want to believe the best about others. They assume that if they continue being patient and supportive, eventually the other person will recognize their kindness and respond with the same level of care. But the Buddha encouraged people to look at reality instead of clinging to hope. Hope is comforting, but it can also blind us. If someone's actions repeatedly show that they only value you when you are useful, that pattern is not accidental. It is a reflection of how their mind approaches relationships. Observing this truth does not require anger. It simply requires awareness. You begin watching what people do instead of focusing only on what they promise. You begin noticing how they behave during moments when you cannot help them. You begin paying attention to whether appreciation exists or whether your efforts are simply expected. These observations provide valuable insight, because once you clearly understand someone's mindset, your expectations naturally change. You stop expecting loyalty from someone who consistently shows opportunistic behavior. You stop expecting emotional support from someone who never provides it. You stop expecting appreciation from someone who has grown accustomed to taking your help for granted. This change in expectations protects your mind from disappointment. Disappointment often arises when reality fails to match the story we created in our mind. But when you see the situation clearly, the story disappears. You simply understand the nature of the relationship. And once you understand that nature, you are free to decide how much space that person should occupy in your life. The Buddha often spoke about wise association. He taught that the people around you influence the quality of your mind. If you constantly surround yourself with individuals who treat relationships like transactions, your mind will remain disturbed. You will constantly feel pressure to prove your value. You will constantly feel responsible for maintaining connections that offer little stability in return. But when you begin observing people carefully, you become more selective about who receives your time and energy. You begin investing in relationships where mutual respect exists. You choose companions who support your growth rather than constantly demanding your support. This process does not require harsh judgment. You do not need to label someone as a bad person. You simply recognize the way their mind functions. Some people approach relationships through genuine care. Others approach relationships through advantage. Once you understand which type of person you are dealing with, your path becomes clearer. You naturally reduce your involvement with those who constantly take without appreciation, and you naturally move closer to those who value connection instead of convenience. The Buddha taught that wisdom is not complicated. Wisdom is simply seeing things as they truly are. When you see people clearly, without illusions or excuses, you stop wasting your energy trying to transform those who are not ready to change. You accept what their behavior reveals. And with that acceptance, you make wiser decisions about where your time, attention, and trust truly belong. This clarity protects your peace, because once you understand the mind of another person, their behavior no longer confuses you. It simply confirms what you already see. One of the deepest traps in human relationships is the desire for validation. Many people give endlessly, not only because they are kind, but because somewhere inside they hope their kindness will finally be recognized. They hope that if they continue helping, supporting, and sacrificing, the other person will eventually appreciate them. They hope that one day the person who constantly takes from them will say, "I truly value you." But the Buddha taught that seeking validation from others is one of the most subtle forms of attachment. When your sense of worth depends on how others treat you, your peace becomes fragile. Your happiness begins depending on something outside your control. And the problem becomes even worse when the people you are trying to please are guided by selfishness. A selfish person rarely stops to reflect on how much someone has given them. They simply become accustomed to receiving. What once felt like generosity eventually becomes something they expect. Your effort becomes normal to them. Your sacrifices become invisible, and the appreciation you were hoping for never truly arrives. Many people remain trapped in this cycle for years. They keep giving more. They keep hoping that eventually their loyalty will be noticed. But instead of appreciation, they receive more requests, more expectations, more emotional demands. The Buddha encouraged people to examine this pattern carefully. If you constantly seek validation from someone who benefits from your sacrifices, you are placing your peace in the hands of someone who has no reason to protect it. Because the more you give without boundaries, the more normal your effort becomes to them. They stop seeing your kindness as generosity. They start seeing it as your role. And once something becomes your role in their mind, they no longer feel the need to appreciate it. This realization can feel painful at first, because it forces you to confront a difficult truth. Some people will never recognize your value no matter how much you give. Not because you lack value, but because their mind is focused on benefit, not gratitude. The Buddha taught that true freedom begins when you stop chasing approval from the wrong sources. Instead of constantly proving your worth, you begin grounding your sense of value within yourself. You understand that your kindness does not need constant recognition to remain meaningful. You understand that your generosity does not need applause to remain noble. And most importantly, you understand that your peace of mind is not something that should depend on someone else's appreciation. When this realization becomes clear, something powerful happens inside you. You stop overextending yourself in order to be liked. You stop exhausting yourself trying to earn respect from people who never offered it. You stop chasing validation from those who only see you when they need something. Instead, you begin living with quiet confidence. You help others when it feels right. You offer support when it aligns with your values. But you no longer sacrifice your well-being just to maintain someone else's approval. This shift creates a powerful sense of freedom. Because once you stop seeking validation from selfish individuals, their influence over your emotions disappears. If they appreciate you, that is fine. If they ignore your effort, that is also fine. Your sense of worth no longer depends on their response. The Buddha often described freedom as the ability to live without being controlled by craving, fear, or attachment. Seeking validation is a subtle form of craving. It is the craving to be seen, praised, and acknowledged. But when you release that craving, your mind becomes independent. You no longer need others to confirm your value. You simply live according to your principles. You treat people with kindness. You offer help when it is appropriate. And you protect your energy when someone repeatedly abuses your generosity. This balance allows compassion to exist without self-destruction. It allows kindness to exist without exploitation. And it allows your mind to remain calm regardless of how others behave. Because once you stop seeking validation from those who use you, you reclaim something extremely valuable: your inner freedom. The freedom to give without expectation. The freedom to walk away without guilt. And the freedom to build relationships based on genuine respect instead of constant approval. Before you leave, take a moment to reflect on something important. Many people spend years trying to fix relationships that were never balanced from the beginning. They keep giving more time, more effort, more patience, hoping that one day the other person will finally change. But wisdom begins when you stop asking how to change others and start asking what you are willing to tolerate. The Buddha taught that suffering often continues because we cling to what disturbs our peace. We hold on to people, habits, and situations long after they have shown us their true nature. Detachment is not rejection. Detachment is understanding. It is recognizing when a relationship is built on mutual care and when it is built on constant taking. It is seeing clearly who values your presence and who only values your usefulness. And once you see that truth, you no longer need anger or conflict. You simply adjust your path. You invest your time in people who respect you. You protect your energy from those who constantly drain it. And you allow your life to become lighter, calmer, and more balanced. Remember this: you do not need to harden your heart to protect your peace. You only need to open your eyes. Because the moment you stop chasing the approval of those who use you, your mind becomes free. Free to grow. Free to focus on your own path. And free to build relationships that are rooted in genuine respect, not convenience. That is the quiet strength of detachment. And that is the beginning of a truly peaceful life.